Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 299. We're going to talk about the subjectivity of truth. Now, this episode is actually a response to a comment that I had received on sorry, episode 202. And it's a response to Wise Elk 130. I hope it's okay that I said that. But I just want to say in general that I appreciate comments on videos as long as I get the notification that a comment has been made. And I try to respond whenever that happens. It's so rare that I jump all over it when I do see that someone had made a comment. Because it reminds me of when I was teaching at the university, I loved questions from students because it challenged me, right? They would always try to prove that I was wrong, which was great because then it helped me to know if I had any weak points in the argument that I was trying to make. And it also told me that the students were listening. They were engaging with the ideas that I was trying to teach them, and so it was an awesome situation, especially towards the end when a couple of years ago when my contract wasn't renewed. I literally got almost 100% participation from the students by using technology, using discussion boards, and so I would get to hear, especially the students that don't like to talk in class, they got to post things that they wrote. And they didn't care if anyone read what they wrote, but I would be able to answer every single question without any time restriction. So it was awesome. And so whenever I see a comment, I get excited. All right, so so I'm addressing the question of whether truth actually is subjective, right? And it's a very controversial statement to say that truth with a capital T is subjective, if that's the way you understand it. So I'm going to start with my conclusion and then go back to the beginning and work to that conclusion. So my conclusion actually is never stated, but I personally believe that there is a truth. There is an absolute, never changing object. If we dare to use the word objective, which I generally tend not to, but I can't get into it because I just don't have enough time. But that there is a capital T truth. Absolutely, for sure, yes. But the problem is that all human beings are starting from a position of ignorance, right? At birth, what do we know? We can't even talk. We don't have information and knowledge. And so, as soon as we're born, or even maybe while we're still in the womb and we can hear things through, uh, you know, through the womb, we can hear things and start to learn, and then we're radically challenged once we pop out into the world and we begin this, based on which senses are actually working, we're then taking in all this information and we're learning and we're growing. But we all start from ignorance, and depending on our circumstance, our culture, uh, I don't know, the what do you call it, standard of living of our parents, location, all of this stuff, time period, then that process or that journey of learning is always going to be unique for each person. We don't all go through the same learning process. And so therefore our subjectivities are all going to be different. In other words, where we see the world and how we see it are always going to be unique to the person who's doing it. Okay. But the crazy thing is that everyone believes that they already know the truth, right? Not just for themselves, but for everybody. And so everyone else is a moron because they just simply can't grasp or see what is so obviously true. And I got to tell you that there are few people more stubborn than a second semester college freshman. Okay. They take a couple of classes and then they think they know it all, right? It's pretty crazy. But once you're on the teaching side of things, then you see it, right? If they had a professor, they loved that professor, then that person spoke truth, right? And that's all they repeat for the rest of their life in college, and unfortunately, maybe in for the large part of their lives. Keep in mind that because of this, right, normally I go through 2 weeks, that's 6 full lectures, to get to the point where I can have a conversation with students in a class, generally speaking. And it was convenient because 2 weeks was the add drop period, where students would drop a class, add a class. And so I would use those 2 weeks to get student because, the turnover rate was crazy in my classes, right? And I didn't want to be really thick into an argument and then have a new student and then they would get really angry because they have no idea what we're talking about. So I would use that time to slowly go through this, call it epistemology, right? The study of knowing, right? How do we know what we know? And I would take 2 weeks to sort of let them marinate in all this new information. But at the end of it, then we can all have a conversation, right? And so I'm going to try to summarize that approach, that methodology that I would use every semester in about 20 minutes. So I got 14 minutes left. So here it is. I want to try to do it. So keep in mind that I'm going to probably gloss over certain details. I'm probably not going to spend as much time as I normally do, but I'll just give you an overview and you can see if it's legit or not. But I got to tell you, uh, as a person who is a Jesus freak, conservative, super conservative Christian, and a free market anarcho-capitalist, okay, to be as popular, if I dare say, uh, because I would have students wait 3 years to take my class, right? So as to be successful and in teaching for as long as I was in a state university, right? To be able to last about 30 years teaching at a state university, when the university itself was gradually becoming more and more woke, uh, it kind of works. Okay. In other words, I should have been so hated and that I would be canceled. Now, keep in mind, I do think that the fact that I was a Christian and the fact that I was a free market anarcho-capitalist had something to do with my non-renewal or breach of contract. And so I didn't get a new contract to teach a few more years. Anyway, I think it had something to do with it, but it's just speculation on my part. And my concentration for my PhD was race theory. So, right, so here I am in a liberal state university where everyone is going woke by the year. Uh, and I'm going to talk about race from a free market perspective as a Jesus freak, right? And I made no apologies for who I was. And day one, I would come out and tell everyone what my own subjectivity was. And if it bothered them a lot, they could just drop the class. Okay. So I wasn't pulling any punches. I wasn't hiding anything. And how do you talk about race if everyone already believes they know the truth? They know who the racists are, right? They know who needs to pay, who's guilty. So how do you persuade them that and convince them that they don't know it all and that we need to have a conversation, right? So unless I can convince them that they need to learn more, then there's no way to have a conversation. And so after about 10 years, I came up with a method. Uh, and what I would do is I would walk into class one day and I said, I'm going to show you, I would prepare them. I would say, I'm going to show you a picture of Donald Trump. After 2016, that was the name I would use. Even today, right? And it works because he's president again. People freak out. As soon as they hear the word name Donald Trump, 80% of the class just freak out. And I said, calm down. It's okay. And I would say, I'm just going to show you a picture of Trump. He's not here. Don't start crying. And I would pull out a piece of paper that was red, a red piece of paper. And they would look at me like, what? You said you were going to show me a picture of Donald Trump. And I said, yes, this is Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is red. You grew up learning, thinking that Donald Trump is red. Everyone around you, they said, yes, Donald Trump is red, right? And you can see what I'm doing. I'm trying to simplify it so that everyone says, yeah, okay, if that's a picture of Donald Trump, then Donald Trump is red. Yes, I see it. All your teachers say he's red. All your friends say he's red. Your family says he's red. Okay, he's red. It's obviously true. Donald Trump is red. And then you meet me, I would say. So all of you say he's red, but then you meet me and I say he's white. And everyone looks at me and says, what are you talking about? It's red. And I said, no, I think you're all wrong. In fact, you are wrong. I need you to explain to me why you are wrong. And they're all looking at me like, are you joking? Are you serious? And I said, I'm totally serious. You are wrong. Donald Trump is not red. And they're all looking at me. They're looking at the red piece of paper and they're saying, what are you talking about? You said this is a picture of Donald Trump and you say he's red. And now you're telling me he's not red. No one ever really got it unless they read my book, right? And then the picture is in there as well. And I would flip the paper over and it was a piece of art paper. So one side was red, the other side was white. And so I try to get them to realize that depending on their subjectivity, depending on where they are looking at something, observing something, their truth was going to be different. In fact, the more sure you are, you know the truth, the more likely that you don't. And so I would, using that two-sided piece of paper, I would say, look, this is just a piece of paper, right? You're on that side of the paper, I'm on this side of the paper. We're looking at the same object, but we see different things. Now, think about race, the concept of race, which is infinitely more complicated. Everyone who's going to be studying race will have a different opinion. And it's true. You go to the library, in a university library, there are literally thousands of books on race, and each one of them has a different understanding of what race is. So who's right and who's wrong? And that's just the published books, right? It doesn't look at all of the individuals who says, well, that's not how I think race is, right? Everyone has their own truth, right? Or if we just say it in another way, what they believe is the right understanding of whatever it is that they're talking about. So once I got them to realize by this simple piece of paper, because I would always just say, why are we talking only about the color? What about the shape? What about the thickness? What about the weight? What about the material? Why are we even talking about Donald Trump? You see, and I try to get them to realize that a fixation on a tidbit of information saying this is the truth doesn't really inform them on how to process information in the rest of the world, the rest of their life. And if their belief of Donald Trump doesn't help them determine what their major is, what job they should take, who they should marry if they marry, then really it's not an important piece of information after all. They're making a big deal out of it, but that truth really does nothing for them. Oh my goodness, I'm on 12 minutes already and I'm not even a tenth way through of what I need to say, but I'll just keep on pushing. It might go a little bit long. I'll try to pick up the pace just so I can get to the point, right? So once I get them to realize that they're all limited by their prior knowledge, everything that they learned up to that moment, and their perspective, then I went into how they were socialized through education, right? So everything that they thought was education was just simply a socialization process. They weren't learning, they were being taught how to see, what to see, how to do research so that they all have the same conclusion, right? So basic science, if you ever took basic science courses, even in high school, they tell you the scientific method, you do the experiment in exactly this way so that everyone gets the same result, right? And see, there, that's science, right? Oh, okay, so basically all of education was structured that way. Everyone is taught to think, study to the test. Here's the question, here's the answer so that everyone is saying the same thing. So this is not education, this is socialization. It's not critical thinking, which is what a lot of them would like to call it, give it a nice sounding name to make it seem like they're thinking critically, but really they're just being socialized to all believe the same thing. 90% of other instructors at the university taught this sort of neo-Marxist way of thinking, simplistic binaries, where both choices are really bad, if not wrong. So one of the things, and I've said this before in other episodes, you know, there are a lot of professors who would debate through their published books while they're getting their tenure, which came first, racism or slavery. And I would put that question to the students, and they all would answer the question. And I said, "Why'd you answer the question? I just told you that when someone comes at you with two choices, it's probably a little bit sus, right? There's a little suspicious, right?" And I would show them that uh, these two choices, this simple binary, racism or slavery, is a false dichotomy, right? You're led to think that all you have to know is racism or slavery. Like nothing else is important to know, like economics, right? Resources, technology, right? Invasion, war, none of that is important, just racism or slavery, right? And it always assumes that slavery existed. That's why you have racism. But there are certain parts of the world where slavery did not exist, not slavery in the sense that we know it here in the West. And so, if all of that is socialized thinking, then that's all they learned. They don't know the truth. They just know what someone basically told them is true. So, what don't they know? What has been withheld from them? And so, I would go into the artificial leaf, which was developed by an MIT professor in 2008, but then that technology was buried, right? Thorium reactors instead of uranium reactors. Then we talked about climate change, green energy, how it's not really what they've been taught it was, right? And then all of a sudden their heads are exploding. They're like, "Oh my gosh, what have I been learning?" And so now they're like, "Tell me more." And so I said, "What do you believe?" Belief, your belief, what you think is true, only works until it doesn't. It's sort of like Christians when they're raised in a bubble, like Christian community, Christian schools, Christian friends, and then they go to a secular university, a non-Christian university, and then they're told to read Gilgamesh, right? And the professor tells them, "See, they have a flood story here. It sounds just like the Old Testament, or Hebrew scriptures, and so therefore." Scripture is plagiarized as plagiarism of Gilgamesh, right? So whoever wrote scripture, they just plagiarized Gilgamesh, right? And so then all these Christians, they're shocked. They don't know what to do, right? And so everything that they believed was true is somehow challenged by all this information that they're not ready to deal with, okay? And so their truth is a little shaky now, right? And no one ever told them how to address that, how to, process all of that information. Okay. And so whenever our circumstances change, whenever society changes, whenever we get older and therefore our life change, our perspectives change, right? We're closer to death now. We're not as strong and our bodies don't recover in the way that it did when we were younger. Right. And so change is a part of life. Whenever we encounter or realize change, it forces us to have to reevaluate everything that we know. In other words, our truth might need a little bit of an adjustment. So, if everything we know is just basically socialization, it's not necessarily knowledge, then where do we go from here? And so I offer them one way to sort of start our journey and conversation with each other is through definitions, right? We dig down deep to understand what people are actually saying. What do they mean by those words? And believe me, now that I'm teaching middle school, I realize that that actually is a big thing. Like most people today never think about definitions, right? I remember a lot of people were telling students, "Oh, try to guess the definition by the context." And ultimately, most kids, they don't even try to look at the context. They just read the words and then they wait for the teacher to tell them what it means, right? And so there's no need to actually understand the text that they're reading. And so the definitions of words don't matter. And so make it matter. I say, "Hey, look, we have to understand really what people mean by the words that they say, and then we can go from there." And so I use religion, the word religion, as the first trial practice deconstruction, right? Where you take a word and you take it apart to see really what they're talking about. And so, depending on who you are and your understanding of religion, that's how you're going to define religion. And so, religion department people are going to say, "Oh, maybe it's a belief in God or a spirit or something like this," right? And then people say, "Well, I don't believe in that, so I must be an atheist," right? Or I'm agnostic, right? And so based on the definition that you offer, people are going to hear the definition and either agree, disagree, or somehow try to modify, right? We're going to attach adjectives to the word, right? So I'm religiously not religious, right? And so we're going to try to tweak the word to make it fit whatever it is that our subjectivity is telling us we are. Right. So, what I would always say is, okay, well, what we need, if we're going to talk about religion, we need to be able to include everyone into the discussion. You can't give someone an arbitrary advantage or disadvantage based on the definition by itself. Right. So, if we say that religion is a belief in a God or gods, then you open the opportunity for people to say, yeah, I'm excluded from this conversation because I don't believe in any God, right? And so I say, okay, well, how do we bring these people into the conversation? We have to redefine religion. And so I get to the point where I say, right, because Buddhism went through this thing in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. People debated whether Buddhism was a religion or not, right? Because the definition of religion that people were using meant that Buddhism was not a religion. Well, we know the result of that debate. People say, yeah, it's religion and it's not religion, right? It's philosophy. Okay, and so this is the thing. So any definition that we have, any word that we use, is constantly challenged as we encounter things that are different, things that were not accounted for before. And so I told everyone, look, my definition of religion is system of belief. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. System of it doesn't even have to make sense. It doesn't even have to be logical. It's just that you believe it's true. And so now that's your religion, right? And you hold on to that religion until you can no longer afford to hold on to that religion. Okay. And so, depending on who you are, where you are, how you understand things, that is going to determine your subjectivity. Okay. I'm going to skip over a couple parts. Okay. But there was Wise Elk 130. He said, belief encounters reality. And when our belief doesn't, or our truth encounter, I'm approximating. I'm sorry if I got it wrong, but doing it from memory. Belief encounters reality, and if our belief doesn't match with reality, then we have a problem. Yes, totally agree. When your belief no longer works, you have to make an adjustment. The what do you call them? The fanatics do not make an adjustment. No matter what, even if they're losing limbs, they're still going to hold on to their belief, right? But most other people, when your belief no longer works, it's too expensive and costly to maintain those beliefs, you make an adjustment. And so when we are challenged, we adjust. It's like when we grow up, right? When we're younger, it's easy to believe in Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, whatever, what is it? A benevolent government, whatever, right? It's easy to believe in that when we're little, and then as you get older, you're like, oh no, no, that can't be right, right? Because we're challenged, and so our information, our understanding, our subjectivity is constantly challenged, and as we meet these challenges, we grow up. And so our truth gradually changes. So on a bigger scale, what I like to say is we engage in truth discovery. As we grow in our knowledge and understanding, as we mature in the way that we process information, we discover truth. We discover better truth, right? We go through life getting closer to the truth, the absolute eternal truth, right? And so therefore, because we're so limited, right? And our minds are so small, we can only grasp a certain amount of this ginormous truth that is out there. We should never stop. Because as soon as you stop learning and pushing your understanding, you become orthodox, right? You become a fuddy-duddy. And so anyone else who has different ideas, you call them heretics. Oh, how dare you disagree with me, right? And we can see this happening with the whole Karen phenomena, the whole woke stuff that we see. They double down on their own subjectivity. It becomes an orthodoxy. It becomes sacred truth for them. And so to go against it is to be heresy, is blasphemy, right? You don't deserve the right to speak. You must be canceled. And this is why I'm a free speech absolutist, right? We need to have the exchange of ideas. We need to be free to say whatever it is that we want so that we can be challenged by the things that other people say. And Every time we're challenged, we either our beliefs are affirmed, right? Like, oh, I was right, or we realize that we were wrong, and so we uh, adopt a better belief. So we discard bad ideas for better ones, right? It's the free market of ideas, right? We need that, right? Because we're constantly growing. Even scientists will admit that things that they thought were true, all of a sudden they did research and all of a sudden it's not true any longer, right? And then going into all the quantum mechanics, what do you call it? Scientific determinism, all this other kind of stuff, and I talked about postmodernism in an episode, a couple episodes ago, right? It gets dizzying, right? With people who just sit around all day just thinking of things, it can get pretty deep, it can get pretty abstract, whatever. And for that person, it's the truth. But I don't know it, but somehow I'm able to live day to day because my truth at this moment enables me to live my life. But as soon as we encounter change, then do we adjust or do we double down and crash and burn eventually? I like to think of here's an example, another example of how limited we are in our ability to perceive this capital T truth. I think it's in Hindu religion, they talk about three blind men trying to understand an elephant, right? They're blind, right? They can't see anything. So one guy is holding the trunk of the elephant and said, "Oh, elephant is like a snake." Another guy is touching the side of the elephant and says, "No, no, no, you don't know what you're talking about. An elephant is like a wall." And another guy is holding onto the leg of the elephant and says, "You guys are weird, man. Elephant is like a column of a support structure, right?" And so each of them are not wrong, but they only have a partial understanding of what an elephant is. And so what they need to do is they need to keep learning more. They need to understand why the other two people are saying something completely different, right? Each one of those three blind men are sincere in describing exactly what it is that they're sensing, but they're only seeing a part of the truth. And personally, I believe this absolute truth that is out there is infinite. And because we're so finite, we can only get bits and pieces of it. I mean, especially when you look at the higher maths and cosmology, right? They go on and on. I don't understand any of it, you know. Personally, I don't really. I'm going to focus. I focus more on the practical, everyday stuff. On a personal note, look, I said I was a Jesus freak, okay? But anyone who knows anything about Christianity, you know that Christians rarely agree with each other, right? That's why there's so many different denominations and so many different sects, because people double down on their own personal interpretation of what they believe is the truth. And so everyone else is wrong. And so growing up in that world, I mean, everyone is either wrong or everyone is right. And so for me, whatever interpretation I might have of scripture or of Christian faith, if it doesn't explain the world, then you got to keep on pushing and learning, right? That for me is the criteria, right? So in faith, one day I'll know as I'm known, scripture reference. But but there is a truth. Again, we're just so limited that we can only come to know the truth gradually, more and more as we go through life. We express what we know through whatever department of the university we studied, our personal religion, whatever that might be, whether it's deism, atheism, or some formal religion, or some personal mishmash of whatever it is you want to believe. Our life experiences influence what we know, and all of it collectively is our truth. It's true for us, and you can't deny it for any individual. But at the same time, it's very rare that someone else will agree with everything that you're saying. I mean, look at marriage. I mean, it's a very rare thing that both people in that situation, that most intimate of relationships, will agree with everything. It just, I don't know. Maybe people are like that, but my own marriage, it doesn't happen that way, right? You don't see eye to eye with everything. So it's through changes in society and in life, if we're honest, we continue to make adjustments on our understanding of what is right and wrong. The woke, the leftists, the neo-Marxists, they're either liars for power or they're hypocrites. Okay. They say they believe that there is no truth, but then they say they believe something for the purposes of gaining power. Or they claim there's no truth so that they can eradicate existing power structures so they can then seize that power by declaring that their subjective perspective is true, right? There's no gender, but my understanding of gender is superior to yours, and now you have to submit to what I say is gender, right? So it's a bunch of hypocrites, right? And so therefore not true. Most of my colleagues, they hated debating with me because all I would do is listen to them and then point out their hypocrisy, their contradiction, and then the argument would be over. And generally it would take about 2 hours for them to reveal their contradiction and hypocrisy. And it really bothered them. And so people stopped, trying to challenge me. But that's what I would do. And so I don't presume knowing the absolute truth. I just like to think that I'm on the pathway of getting to know that truth better. But I do believe ultimately there is a capital T truth, right? And my faith, my personal faith would say, yeah, and that's God, right? But other people who don't believe in God, they're not going to agree with me, but they're going to continue to work towards the capital T truth, and everyone is going to believe it's something different. But as long as we have the freedom to engage in dialogue, the freedom to continue to create value for society, then all of our understandings will constantly be challenged, either undermined and revealed as being wrong, and therefore very, very costly, or affirmed. And so we continue down that path until we're challenged again. And once again, we're challenged to either be undermined or to be affirmed, or something in between. Maybe we go sideways. But that's the thing. And so especially in a university setting where everyone already believes that their own different truth is the truth, how do you have a conversation? Well, you just say everyone has to abide by the rule. Everything is subjective. Well, if everything is subjective, then how do we learn anything? And you proceed from there, and that would be the reason why I always talk about the subjectivity of truth, right? Because I never know who's going to listen to this. And so everyone, if you think about it, they get to believe what is true and continue to believe is true. I'm not saying you're wrong, but if your idea is not the best, then you are going to pay through the nose for those ideas, right? And if it weren't for the Federal Reserve right now printing all this liquidity, right, just printing all these dollars, then we would have realized that the leftists, the neo-Marxists, the wokesters, right, are engaging in extremely expensive behavior, and very few people would be a part of that movement if the government did not fund so much of it. I hope that clarifies a little bit. I went a little bit long, but I hope you understand why, and that I hope that clarifies a lot. I will talk to you guys next time.